So welcome to this edition of 22nd Century Management with Ken. Do me a favor, put in the chat, put where you're watching from. I always like to know where the people are coming from. This episode today, I have with me Rocky Romanella. He is a motivational speaker. He spent 36 years with UPS, had multiple very responsible positions. He's also the author of a book. We're going to talk about the book a little bit. We're going to talk about management and leadership. Now, Rocky, tell us a little more about yourself.
Hey, Ken, it's a pleasure to be on the show with you and your audience. Yeah, as you said, 36 years at UPS, started part-time unloading trailers at UPS. UPS had a promotion from within policy, which I took advantage of and, rose through the ranks part-time, was a UPS delivery driver, and then started my various assignments along the way throughout the country, as a matter of fact, and had the opportunity to do some pretty interesting things inside UPS. Obviously, I did all the traditional things of the small package pickup and delivery, but I had the opportunity, for example, when we purchased mailboxes, et cetera, I was part of that was a direct report, and I was part of the team to recommend the rebranding, and we now rebranded it to the UPS Store, and then also built what's today UPS Supply Chain Solutions after over 20 acquisitions. And it's with a lot of joy and pleasure that you see UPS Supply Chain being such a huge part of the distribution of the vaccines. Retired after 36 years, became the CEO of a telecom company. We built cell towers, upgraded cell towers, did installation work, sold that company, and then started my own company, 360 Management Services, where we focus in on keynote speaking, leadership development, and some, I would say process improvement consulting.
Okay, well, very nice. And it's interesting. You sound a lot like me because officially I retired from in the service industry, working for the manufacturers in the copier space 4 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Then I went and started 3 companies. So it's hard to, once you get involved in business and you get really active in trying to manage and trying to help things grow, it becomes very difficult to not have those responsibilities, even if it's for, in my case, a one-man company. I love the challenge of business. One of the things that got me started was when I worked in the copier space. What I saw was over and over, people would walk up to their best technician and they'd say, "Poof, you're the service manager," and they'd walk away. And it made me nuts because I watched these guys struggle and fight and not have any real success. A lot of them either went back to being a technician or they left the company because they just didn't get the training. So that is my main focus now. As I do training, I do some consulting in that space. And you said process improvement, and process is one of my favorite words when I teach service management, because it's all about building systems and processes that drive the results you want. At least that's my opinion.
I agree 100%.
So one of the questions I have is that in your book, you make the statement, and I want to explore this a little bit, is don't stop at the first right answer. So what do you mean by that and why?
Well, in my book here, Tighten the Lug Nuts, interestingly enough, I do have a copy of it right here, but Tighten the Lug Nuts, we talk a lot about that concept of not stopping at the first right answer. And frankly, that's what you try to do as a leader, is to challenge your people not to do that. Now, there's ways to do that. In fact, one of my ways, interestingly enough, is the book is written in a third person. And how that happened to us some years ago, as people would bring me a new idea, and I would say, Ken, that's a great idea, but what if? That what if always sort of turned you off a little bit, and you had that look like, I wonder if he thinks it's not a good idea, or maybe I wasn't prepared. And so I created this fictional character just in the course of a conversation named Joe Scafone. And I would say to you, "Hey, Ken, that's a great idea, but you think Joe thinks it's a good idea?" And we would all laugh. But it was my way of challenging you not to stop at the first right answer. It wasn't that your first right answer was bad, because obviously it was the right answer. But if I challenge you to look past that answer, could go a little deeper and wider, could you maybe find a better, not so much a better answer, but an answer that maybe could look at things from its widest consequences. Maybe you would uncover a potential service disconnect. Because if you think about it, some of the things that really hurt a great idea are some of the unintended consequences that you don't see. And so if I challenge you not to stop at the first right answer and move you past that first right answer in a positive way, you may uncover some of those unintended consequences. And so that's really the goal for me, was always to challenge you, but in a positive way. And Joe Scafone helps me with that. And in fact, the book is written in the third person. It's written, Joe Scafone's, kind of travels over a 40-year career.
Okay. Well, very nice. And it's interesting that you write in the third person like that. And one of the things that I teach my service managers to do is to business plan. And I tell them that if they're going to go see their manager with an idea, they need to have a business plan, depending on the scope, obviously, of the idea, the depth of the business plan. But too many times, and I was guilty of this when I worked for a manager in El Paso, and he's the one that drove that point home to me. Because I'd walk into Tony's office and said, "Hey, Tony, I got a great idea. I think we should do this." And he'd look at me and say, "What's it going to cost? What's the risks? What's the benefits?" He taught me to think through it the way he would think through it. And so that's one of the things I try to do in class, is help. A lot of these guys are young managers, and some of them have been managers for years, but nobody's ever taught them to think through the process of looking at the pros and the cons, look at what is it going to cost, what's the risk, what's the ROI, and just try to really flesh out something before they run in and say, "Hey, I got a great idea." Because if the boss asks you a question, so in your case, if Joe Scarpone asked a question, you probably should have an answer. What do you think about that?
I think that's true, but we talked a few minutes ago about process. So I'll give you my process, right, when it comes to that, because I agree with you 100%. My process is this concept of balanced leadership. I think that when you're making these key decisions, you make them in the context of three important constituents. It's your customers, it's your people, it's your share owners or stakeholders. And so for me, Ken, if you presented me an idea, and of course, to your point, as time goes on, you're training them that if you're going to come to present a new product or service, you have to be prepared to answer those three key questions. And so for me, you would present, for example, a new product, and I would listen, and to make sure all three constituents were represented. So you would go through a really tight deck where you really really talk about how this fits the portfolio, why the customers think it's a great product, why it's the right thing for us to do, and what's its niche in our portfolio. And I would sit and think, okay, well, the customer's represented. And then of course the CFO, he or she's sitting there banging on a calculator, the price point you figured out with marketing, the production cost per unit. CFO looks and says, "You know what? We can make this work. This could be a really good product for us." At that point, I would look at them and say, okay, well, customers are represented and our share owners or stakeholders are represented, but how about our people? Excuse me? Well, what's the training that our people need? How do they handle a service disconnect? Do they understand why it's an important product in our portfolio and how important it is to us to have a good launch? Do we ask them their opinion of how to launch? So until all three constituents are represented, then I would say, well, look, come back with me with how you're going to handle the people side of it, and then we'll discuss it. So they come back a few weeks later, and they've got it all laid out. This is how we're going to train our people. And then I always ask them the final question. And to me, this was the question that kind of separates the story from kind of when the rubber meets the road is probably a better way of putting it. And I would ask the question, hey, if this was your candy store, would you write the check to do this? And it's interesting. They look at you and they say, well, if this was coming out of your paycheck, if this was coming out of your checking account, would you write this check to do this? And I would say about 80% of the time, people would look at you and say, yeah, if this was my store, if this was my business, I would do it. Well, then they're all in. They're committed. I will tell you, there were times where people would look at me and say, no, I don't. Well, no. If you're telling me I'm writing a check, I wouldn't do it. And I said to them, well, you just presented to me a well-articulated deck, PowerPoint presentations of why we should do it. Why do you want me to do it? Well, because you said you needed a new product. We needed to drive new revenue. This is what the organization needs. But I wouldn't do it because the warranty part of it's really terrible. We've got a 5-year tail on warranty. It's a difficult from a health and safety point of view. And it's interesting because when you ask them that question of thinking like an owner, if this was your business, would you do it? It really changes the whole, kind of complexion of the presentation. And so to me, that's always the final question. So I make sure the customers, people, and shareholders are represented. And then I always make sure I ask that final question. Hey, if this was your candy store, would you do it?
Yeah, and I love that question. In fact, that's one of the things I will add when I am talking about that again with my next class. But I do encourage them, and this is you talk about them thinking like owners. One of the things that I teach my managers to do is to train their employees to think about what their area of responsibility as if it was their own business. I think that too many times people micromanage, they don't train people to understand things, they don't delegate. And the result, first of all, is it becomes a huge burden on the manager because he has to make all the decisions. And secondly, I think that it hinders customer, or not customer, but employee engagement. I think that, when somebody's telling you what to do all the time, you just go through the motions of doing it. But I think that it's really important that at every level that the employees be given the opportunity and the training and the responsibility and the authority to start managing their area of the business. In particular with in copier techs, when you're managing a group of them, most of the time they'll have a territory assigned to them that has customers in it. And they have to go out and decide, when to put parts in and how to work their territory, how to manage the service aspect of it so that it's profitable. And I say, teach them how to think through, should I change this part? If I change the part today, what does it cost me in lost part life versus what does it save me in mileage and a second trip back? To understand those things. And then I think that really helps to level up the whole company if people think like that.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think you said some really excellent things in there, but I think two of them always jump out at me because I think they're the staple of what you're trying to accomplish and what you need to do to accomplish it. And that's your authority has to equal your responsibility. So if I'm going to give you the responsibility to do those things, I have to give you the authority to do it. Now, I give you the authority because I've worked with you. You've demonstrated that you can handle this responsibility and authority. And then I got to let you fly, and I got to let you do your job. But true empowerment, Ken, and this is, I think, one that sometimes gets confused by people. True empowerment is when people discipline themselves. That's how you know people are truly empowered, right? If you think about that old commercial where the goalie lets the puck in and the coach gives him a lifesaver, right? Well, if you walk over to the goalie and you say to the goalie, it's okay, and he or she's so upset they're banging their stick, and you can see that they're more upset at themselves than you are actually upset with them. Well, then they're empowered. They're disciplining themselves. But if you walk over to the goalie and he says to you or she says to you, yeah, I got no defense, I'm the only one out here playing. Well, they're not empowered. They're just choosing other people to blame for it. So I think that once you give them the authority that goes with the responsibility, they're going to demonstrate to you, are they truly empowered? They're going to be harder on themselves than you'll ever be on them. And then when they come to you, they'll come to you with solutions because they're empowered, right? They've disciplined themselves. They thought through what went wrong, what they could have done differently. And then what you're doing then is you're that person then that listens and says, okay, that sounds like a good idea. We'll try that. There's no need to pile on as the manager or the leader. You only pile on if you think the person's not empowered, but then if you pile on, if they're not empowered, they're never going to be empowered. So I think piling on never does you any good. Don't be the master of the obvious, right? You can't walk over to the goalie and say, you can't let the pucks in. Yeah, I think he knew that when he signed up for the job of being goalie and his parents spent all the money on the equipment. So I think that's the key is don't pile on, don't be the master of the obvious after situations happen, but true empowerment when people discipline themselves.
I love that. And that is so true. And I love something else that you said in there too. You talked about, that, you want them to bring solutions. And that's what I tell all of my managers. I said, understand that, because I have a talk about, working with the higher levels of management. I said, understand that when they hired you, as a manager that what they want from you is solutions, not problems. Don't go in and say, I've got a problem. Go in and say, there is a problem and I've got a solution. Because I think that is so, I think it's just such a sign of growth, first of all. And I think it's so important if you want to grow in a company.
I think that's true. I think the other mistake that people make is there's a difference between a mistake. Look, we're all going to make mistakes. We're humans. We do the best we can, and we're going to make mistakes. But there's a big difference between a mistake and making a bad decision. And so, I think that that's what you're trying to separate as the leader are these mistakes that I can retrain them on or discuss with them, why these things happen and how do we solve for those things. But a bad decision is something totally different. For example, every day you get up at 8:00 in the morning, you do this, this, and this, you leave the house by 8:30, you'll get to work by 9:00. If you're a little bit late, the train comes by and you're going to sit behind a train. Now your 9:00 is going to be 9:20. Well, if you get up, if you have a big meeting to go to and you're a little bit late and you're behind a train, you walk in, I made a mistake. I forgot the train was coming. That's not a mistake. That's a bad decision.
Mm-hmm.
The night before, you should have made a decision to set your clock early and make sure you weren't going to be late. That's not a mistake. That's a bad decision. And so there's a difference between the two. And I think as a leader, you have to really kind of understand if it's a mistake, a truly one that we can work on. Hey, you know what? We're going to make them. Let's help them through it. Let's work with them. Let's come up with solutions. But bad decisions, if you start to have a pattern of conduct that says you make bad decisions, it's difficult to have you in a decision-making role.
No, I agree with that. I think that's very insightful. I do think that, and you kind of talked about the making mistake piece of it. I think that every manager needs to give his people the freedom to make some decisions and to understand and be willing to accept the fact they're going to make mistakes.
Absolutely.
They're going to make a bad decision, not poor judgment, but bad decision.
Right.
They'll and I use an example, especially in relationship with customer care. So you give them a reasonable amount of authority to make it right for the customer. And if they go over what they probably should have gone in that situation, you have a conversation, say, I might have done that a little differently, but you don't take away their power and you don't take away their motivation to help the customer. Now, if they refuse to help the customer, that's when we have in my opinion, it would be an example of, okay, that's poor judgment, but you got to take care of the customer. So let me ask you another question. What do you think are some of the hallmarks of being a great leader? And think back to your career. Let's talk about the good and the bad, the things that you saw in leadership in UPS and as you came up.
Well, I think the number one thing is that that you have to believe in your people, and you have to believe in your people many times until they're ready to believe in themselves. When you worked in a promotion from within company, there are many times I got tapped on the shoulder for new assignments and I didn't think I was ready or I didn't have the confidence at that moment. But UPS believed in me well ahead of me believing in myself. And as leaders, we have to do that at times. We bridge that gap of knowledge. We bridge that gap of experience to help them get to that point. So you believe in your people until they're ready to believe in themselves. And then you get to that break-even point where, you've got some experience, you've got some successes that you can build upon, and now you're feeling good about yourself. And then that's the moment where you as the leader, you step back, right? You let them fly. Then that's when you don't overmanage them, because now they've demonstrated that they can do the job, they're comfortable in the job, and they're bringing you ideas, right? They're driving home at night thinking of new ways to do things. And so that's one thing I absolutely learned, both from being that person who was believed in to being now the person believing in others. I think that's what's important. I think the biggest mistake leaders make is they always think it's about them. It's never about you. It's about your people. Nobody likes to sit at a meeting and hear the boss say, hey, by the way, you don't know what it's like to be me. You don't know how much pressure I'm under. You don't know what it's like to go to these meetings. Hey, you know what? That's the job you raised your hand for. You took the job. I don't want to hear how bad your life is. And so when you make it about yourself, you start to make really bad decisions, and they're short-sighted decisions. And you really start to lose your people in that. So it's never about you as the leader. It's always about your people and your ability to engage them, motivate them, and give them the opportunity to grow and develop and feel good about themselves. If they grow, if they develop, if you're a good developer of people, you'll be recognized inside the organization and you'll be fulfilled because, leadership is about leaving things a little better than you found them. Sort of like a teacher, right? Think about this real quick, Ken. If you think about it, if I was in a keynote speech now, fill the room up, 300, 400 people, and I asked a question, hey, who's that? Who's your, Board of Ed person? Who's the local senator for most people can't answer that question. But if I ask the question, hey, who's that teacher that made a difference in your life? Everybody stops, tilts their head. Oh, Miss So-and-so, 5th grade. Mr. So-and-so, 6th grade. Well, everybody has that teacher in their life who's made a difference for them. Well, by that extension, they're leaders. They would say they're not, they're teachers. No, you left things a little better than you found them. And so that's what leadership's all about. And so for me, those leaders that I, kind of worked with and grew up with that didn't understand that always ended up having hollow successes, right? Because the success was all about the numbers, but it never was about the people. And your successes come from your people, right? Profits the applause you get from your customers.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the books that my managers in training have to read is Ken Blanchard's The 1 Minute Manager.
Oh, yeah.
And I love the focus of the 1 minute praising and the concept of walking around trying to catch your people doing something right. So many managers are so negative and create such a negative environment that all they're looking for is the fault. Well, you didn't get that.
Yeah.
And I go back in my life as a parent, and I wish I had been better at catching my son, doing what was right rather than catching him doing, what he didn't do. You go in and you send a person in to clean the room and you walk in, well, that's not clean and that's not clean, and that's not clean. You've just taken all the motivation away from for what they did good. You didn't see the things that they did good. And I think that is a really predominant tendency in a lot of companies, and especially with managers that maybe haven't had any training, that are just, grew in, kind of took over the role, that they tend to look for the wrong instead of the right. What do you think about that as an idea?
Well, I think it's absolutely correct what you're saying. And I think it comes down to this theory that I think is one of the biggest things you have to guard against as a leader, and that's not allowing your strength to be your weakness. And many times your strength becomes your weakness. For example, for me, if you said to me, what's my strength? Well, my strength is, high energy, motivated, can get to a spot quickly, can motivate people to get things done. What's my weakness? Get to the spot quickly, high energy. Sometimes I run past my people without realizing it. In the context of what you just said, I would say that if you think about it, we all grew up, and it's one of the leading theories in business is the 80-20 rule, right? 20% of your people cause you 80% of your problems. Well, then what are we doing then? We're teaching you to work with the 20% least best. So you're focused on those individuals. But what ends up happening is the 80% of the people doing a good job, take it from whatever variation from the, number 79 all the way up to number 1, even 79 is doing better than 80. So therefore you lost the opportunity to recognize them. You're so focused on this 20%. While the 80-20 rule has a place, your responsibility is to make people feel like there's value in being good. And it's the way you recognize them. And if you continue to harp on the 20% least best, I remember when I was, we're in a center one day and we were working on missed pickups, whatever. And there's 40 drivers in the group, and we had one missed pickup yesterday, which is, no, we can't make any missed pickups. But, but that's probably 99%. And occasionally you're going to have one, right? So the manager says, yesterday we had one missed pickup. It's terrible. And then you start watching, he's talking, and I'm looking at all the drivers. They're all like ignoring him now because 39 of the 40 of them didn't have a missed pickup.
Right.
So, but what happened is once he started talking about the one missed pickup, he's talking about one person. Now, first of all, you're not going to call him out in front of everybody because that's not a good way to solve the problem. So what he did is he made all 40 of them feel the same way. When 39 of them he should have said, hey, great job yesterday on your pickups. Keep up the good work. Hey, Tony, can I see you for a second? because there is no reason not to recognize the 39 good, but we're so brought up on hey, identify your weak spot, and, we got to focus on our most help needed employees. So I think that's where our strength as leaders become our weakness, because that's what we've been ingrained in. 20% of your people give you 80% of your problems. And I think that's, let's focus. I think you focus on the 80 and you work on the 20%.
Yeah, I like that. And one of the things that I talk to and teach in class is to look at what can I do to help them. And one of the things I tell them is anytime that you're having a conversation trying to adjust, something where they maybe have made a mistake, you always, as they walk out the door, say, listen, I believe that you can do this. And some of this is from Ken Blanchard's book, but, is what can I do to help you get better? Put yourself on their team.
Yeah. It's the Jerry Maguire, right? It's Jerry Maguire. Help me, help you.
Okay.
Right? Help me, help you. But part of the reason why it's hard to do is you have to look inside yourself, right? Do you create the climate that you're approachable? Do you set the tone from the top that you're willing to listen? Or do you set the tone from the top that you're willing to have that conversation with them? Or do you set up barriers? Inside my book, we have each chapter kind of stands on its own as a business strategy or a business philosophy, but it's in the context of the story. And we talk a lot about that, that concept that you're talking about of communication barriers. And people do there's a great story in there. I won't tell you, I'll let you read it. It's probably it comes out as one of the favorite stories of the readers. But at the end of the day, it was a simple barrier that people put up. They had no idea they were putting up, but wondering why no one's really engaging with me. Well, it's that barrier you put up. And we put up barriers quite often in our communication style, maybe in the way we communicate with people, the context of the way we communicate. And so as the leader, you really have to set the tone from the top that you're willing to listen.
Yeah. It's kind of along that same thing as I teach my managers that when they need, for example, a new procedure, is ask the team to create it.
Yeah.
I'm doing some consulting with a company right now. And one of the things I task the service manager is they need what we would call a total call procedure. In other words, a way to go out and do a service call correctly. And he says, I'm so busy. And I said, ask your team to create it. And then I asked him this question. I said, and why is that important? And he thought about it and he said, buy-in.
Yeah, that's right.
Because when people create something, they take ownership of it. And again, it goes back to this whole concept. If everybody in the company owns their position and what they do and treat it that way, then, life gets better.
I was very fortunate too. So when I started at UPS, I'm unloading trailers, and then I became a UPS driver and loved that part, loved being a driver, and, have my uniform pressed every day, shoes shine. Just was so proud to be a UPS driver. But that was part of the promotion within policy. And so it taught me a valuable lesson, no matter what responsibility I received going forward. So for example, I understood the UPS workings, but now I get tapped on the shoulder to, integrate and run the MBE store network. At the time, I knew nothing about franchising. I wasn't an entrepreneur. And so the first thing I did was go out, meet the people in San Diego where the corporate office was. And then they said to me, what do you want to do next? I said, well, look, you guys you folks keep doing what you're doing. Give me 3 stores. I'm going to go put an apron on and go work the store. Excuse me? I said, yeah. I want to understand what these folks do at the front line. So, and then when I got the supply chain side of the business, hey, met the people, appreciate everything you do. Thanks. Keep doing what you're doing on behalf of our company. Hey, let's see, we have brokerage. I need to go work a day in the brokerage. We have warehousing. I need to go pick some orders. It's the desire to want to do those things that make a difference. Now, look, clearly everybody knows that you're not going to be proficient and you're not going to be an expert in it. And that's not your intention. But what your intention is to kind of learn it like I did from the ground up when I was a driver, and show the respect to those individuals that are doing the job every day, that the first thing you thought about doing wasn't telling them how to do the job, but to ask them to show you how they do their job and why they do it the way they do it. And so I think that's what's so important.
That just reminded me of something. Do you ever watch Undercover Boss?
It's funny. When I was the CEO, the answer is no. And no, I don't really enjoy the show. But I will tell you that when I was the CEO of UniTek, there was talk of me doing that because there was a couple of the other CEOs that had done it. And I didn't have the heart to tell them, I talk about it in the book, that I would never do that. To me, I don't want to be Undercover Boss. I want to be Cheers. Everybody knows your name. So I don't see how, as a CEO, you would be excited that nobody knew who you were.
Well, what I like about the premise of the show is that that's what they do is they go out and see it from, the one, and I don't watch it often, but one that stuck in my mind was a guy went out. It was a food service company, and he went to one of the warehouses. Forget the name of it. It was, but anyway, they were in a food service warehouse, and he was learning to drive the forklift, and struggling with that. And then he was trying to help them do something. And part of that involved this big hill of ice that was in the warehouse, and it was one of those things that, he slipped and, and he's like, why is this here? And he says, well, we've talked to people and nobody will fix it. And I think that there's a lot to be said for the getting your hands dirty part of it and learning what it's like for your employees. In fact, you have to excuse me, my ADHD kicked in here a little bit. But one of the things that I encourage my service managers to do is have their new techs ride with a sales guy for a while and try to get a sales guy to ride with a service tech, because there's this disconnect between them, and each views their job is more important. And, the other person's not, just barely human, walks upright with difficulty kind of thing. And I'm like, let them spend some time with each other to understand each other's problems. And I think that's true, kind of what you were talking about too, about going out and working in a store or working in a facility to understand, what the customer wants, what the challenges are, those kinds of things.
Well, I also think as the leader, you have to walk the talk. You got to get out there. And, I think, listen, the number one reason why most leaders don't leave their office is there's no problems in their office. And what's the biggest problem you have in your office? You don't like the way the bookshelf looks, or the coffee machine's not working. But when you leave that office and you start walking the floor and talking to people, people are going to tell you things, right? And you have to be willing to understand and accept what they're telling you. You do your homework clearly, obviously, right? But at the end of the day, if knowledge bears responsibility. If you're telling me, so think about if you had been that CEO who was by that facility and was walking around and someone says to him, hey, we got a problem here with ice. Well, now he's got responsibility to go fix it. You have to be willing to listen to that individual and then do something about it. Because if you don't do something about it, you just silently sanction an unsafe act maybe, or a bad situation. So you have to think about that. You got to walk the talk. You got to get out there. People, you got to be visible. You got to show that you're willing to engage with your people and get out there. And I think that's what's so important. Now, look, people are going to game you. Everybody's going to tell you, they're going to exaggerate the problems. But at the end of the day, those are small in comparison to the good things that you learn by getting out there. And people see that you care enough to get out there. And there's ways to do that. I know you're busy as CEO. I was one. You know what? You say, hey, if I'm going to go, I have a board meeting in Miami. Hey, where's our closest facility in Miami? It's here. You know what? I'll go a day early and I'll go visit that facility and then go to the board meeting the next day. There's ways for you to do that, but I think it's important that you do that.
Oh, I think so too, because if you're not seeing the problems that your feet on the ground, the frontline people are dealing with, you can't fix them. And most of the time, the information that flows uphill is filtered so intensively to make sure that everybody looks good. The building can be on fire and the CEO would be the last guy to know.
Oh yeah. Well, everybody wants to tell you what you want to hear.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that's a challenge. Do you find it in the companies and in your experience that there was because this is a pet peeve of mine is there's a sense of stagnation or I guess let me phrase it better, that too many cases companies live with the don't rock the boat motto?
Well, I'm not so sure it's the don't rock the boat. I tell you one that I think is one that's not a very good business saying that we've been brought up on, that probably lends itself to what you're talking about. And that's the one that the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. So, okay, so this is the devil. We know the devil, and so we can live with this. Wall Street's famous for that, right? No matter what's going on, as long as it's the devil they know. So they know who this person is, or they know who this president is, or whatever. Okay, they can kind of anticipate. We know the devil, so we're gonna, we can plan better or whatever. And see, I think that's so short-sighted, right? But we all grew up on that. You're ready to make a decision on a person, but you need to make that next promotion. Someone said, well, don't rock the boat, or, hey, the devil is better than the devil you don't know. So let's just go with that. And I think that's so harmful because you may miss out on a really good person that you could promote and put in that position. You may miss out on a great opportunity for your business. So I think that's one of the ones that really drive me crazy. And it's one of those where, you're really just taking the easy way out. Let's keep the status quo and we'll work through that. But you know what? You just made a pact with the devil. you know what the devil is, and you know what they do, and you clearly weren't happy with what the devil was doing, or you wouldn't even had that conversation about changing out. But you took the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know theory, which then ended up being do nothing.
Okay, and actually, you used a term that I like is status quo. Think about this. If you may have walked into companies and ran into this at UPS. I worked for companies, and you ask somebody why they do something, and that's the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a sign right then and there that you need to change whatever it is, because at least you need to investigate to see if that's the best way. A lot of times in companies, you have this kind of, I guess the term is stagnation. That they reach a level of success and everything's kind of working okay.
Well, hey, what's the famous song there? You got to know when to hold them. We got to know when to fold them, right? So there was a time where maybe, the things that you were doing, we've always done it that way, was the right way to do it. But now things have changed. There's new technologies. And so I think, sometimes the toughest decision to make isn't that change to something completely new. It's that change from what you've always done that's been successful. And then how do we get ourselves to that next spot? If you think about it, to me, I think about it. The one thing I always think about is, especially with companies that have a long, rich history, is, and of course, UPS is one of them over 100 years. But think about those, the first 100 years doesn't guarantee the second 100 years. And then you think about it, right, on like 150-year anniversary or some number thereabouts, they said to Sears and Roebuck CEO, hey, how come there's no more Sears catalog? Oh, nobody buys anything on catalogs anymore. That's a way of the past. I don't know. Can you get any more catalogs in your mail every day? Right? Isn't Sears today Amazon? Right? Remember, you could buy anything you wanted out of a Sears catalog. The difference is Amazon's now the Sears catalog, just shipping everything to you through e-commerce. I mean, when they asked the CEO of Woolworths, how come there's not a 5 and dime anymore? Nobody wants a 5 and dime. I don't know. Can you put up another Dollar Tree, Dollar General under 5? No, I guess there's still people that want those stores. You just lost your way, and you weren't selling 5 and dime stuff in there. You were selling TVs, you were selling microwaves, you had a counter for people to eat. So I think that's a very delicate balance, especially if you have some years under your belt as a company. When is the right time to change, and what are the things that you're going to change? And I think that's what is so important, and sometimes very difficult for companies to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in our industry, there's some changes that a lot of us see on the horizon that not everybody's is wrapping their mind around. And they're concerning to me. But I see a lot of that. And you mentioned Sears, and I saw an article yesterday or the day before on the online news that I guess they're getting ready to sell the Sears Tower and close. Pretty much looks like Sears and Kmart are going to go away possibly. But they're very definitely not a shadow of what they used to be. Both were at one time great companies.
Oh, yeah. You would argue that Sears was the largest retailer for a while at some point in their evolution. And no. And they've been going through this restructuring for years now with Sears. So.
Yeah. So, you see that and you think about it, okay, they didn't have to stop being what they were, but they could have improved what they were. They could have still been the retailer for the people in the a long ways away, and let people that aren't close to a store. But let's adapt with technology and become, Sears could have become the Sears online that was comparable to an Amazon or
Oh,
something.
absolutely. Oh, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Hey, look at Walmart, as great as they are, they almost missed it too. I mean, for them, the pandemic was the home run, right? Because people started to pick up come to the store, not go in. They picked up, they started to do more e-commerce. So, I mean, but they were lagging on the e-commerce side for many years, right? They decided that, well, okay, Amazon will be the e-commerce and it will be we'll be come in the store and, the center spot of the town, the Walmart store. But so look, it doesn't matter how big you are, how famous your brand is. At the end of the day, look, who thought Toys R Us wouldn't make it, right? Think about it. And so there's so many examples of that out there where, there's strategy inside a company is such an important um, activity that has to take place. And that's part of the CEO, it's part of the leadership team's responsibility is, less tactical because you have to train your people. As you said before, you got to teach them to give them the authority goes responsibility, but you run the tactical side of the business. We need to make sure we know what we're going to look like in the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 3 years, 5 years kind of idea so that we make our second 100 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's mentioned 5 years, and one of the speeches that I give at trade shows and other places where I'm talking to my audience is the importance of building out a 5-year plan. In the copy industry, it's really important because it's about a 3-year cycle to train somebody to be a good technician. And I ask this question: if you're going to hire a technician today, but you don't know where you're going to be in 3 years, how do you hire?
Yeah, no, it's a great point.
You've got to think about it. And one of probably the least used tools, and I am such a fan of it, is the pest analysis, where you go out and look at, 5 years from now, what is the political environment, the economic, the social, the technology? What are all of those things going to look like, and how is it going to affect my business? What's going to change? It's like driving a car. You don't look, right off the hood. You look as far down the road as you can get.
No, and it's tough too. Sometimes the companies that are first to market, look, I'm sure none of us, we're showing our age here a little bit, Ken, but hey, I'm sure when everybody had an AOL account, nobody thought that AOL was going away, right? I mean, so if you think about that, and so, we were all doing work on TRS-80s, and I'm not even sure any of these kids one of my biggest accounts at UPS was Gateway 2000. So,
Yeah.
everybody had a cow box being delivered to their house. Kids today don't have no clue what that was, and that wasn't that long ago, if you think about it. I mean, so yeah, I think you have to anticipate where the puck's going. Wayne Gretzky's famous line was, they asked him why he was the greatest player of all time, especially in light of the fact he wasn't the fastest skater, wasn't the hardest hitter, didn't have the hardest shot. And he said, well, the difference is I go to where the puck's going, not to where the puck's been. And so if you watch a hockey game, there's 2 or 3 guys in a corner fighting for the puck, but Wayne Gretzky was always in front of the net. And people would say, well, how did Gretzky get so open? Well, because he was where the puck was going, not where the puck was. And that's really what business has to do. You have to go where the puck's going.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great analogy. And on that, I have enjoyed our conversation so much, Rocky. I really appreciate you being there. I will put a link to your book. I'm sure.
Tighten the Lug Nuts. There you go.
Yeah, you go. Tighten the Lug Nuts.
There you go.
I'm pretty sure I got some loose lug nuts.
Yeah.
My wife would say there's something rattling around loose in my head. She's not really sure if it's a lug nut or what it is, but anyway, I will put a link to your book. It's on Amazon, I'm sure.
Yes,
so they can, people can look in the comments. You'll see it whether you on the podcast, on YouTube, or on LinkedIn. You'll be able to get Rocky's book. And Rocky, I look forward to one of these days we'll have another conversation. This has been so much fun.
Oh, Ken, I would enjoy it. And easy enough. My website is tightenthelugnuts.com. So there's more information about the book. There's I just started a 3 to 5 minute kind of inspirational podcast. So I figure people, we launch it, we drop it 2 days a week. It's just on a specific topic, 3 to 5 minutes. So hopefully people will enjoy that as well. We'll see how that works.
Okay. Well, I will put a link to your podcast then so everybody can find you.
Well, thank you,
we'll
sir.
say goodbye to everybody. We'll see you next week.